Can you hear me? Fantastic. Good evening, Superintendent Minor and Board of Directors. I am here this evening to share with you the results of our Spring Smarter Balanced Assessment and our Washington Comprehensive Assessment for Science. I know that we will be diving in a little bit deeper at our study session on November 14th and really talking about how we're making meaning of this data. So tonight my primary focus will be to overview the data and just walk everybody through the data report. So first, to explain a few things, the Smarter Balanced Assessment is one measure. It's not the only measure that we use to look at student progress in the areas of English, language arts, and math, but it is an important measure for assessing school and district effectiveness. It is a required assessment for federal and state accountability, and we test students in grades 3 through 8, and then in grade 10. And at grade 10, a student who is meeting standard level 3 or 4 on the SBA in English, language arts, or math is able to use that to meet a student's graduation pathway requirement from the state. Additionally, this is often referred to as WCAS or WCAS if you want to turn it into one word. The Washington Comprehensive Assessment of Science is one that measures student proficiency in the Washington State science standards. Those were established in 2013. It is also required for federal and state accountability, and it is given to students in grades 5, 8, and 11 annually. The graph that you see here now is one that is measuring overall student participation in taking these 3 assessments. So this is the percentage of students who participated in taking the ELA, Smarter Balanced Assessment, Math, Smarter Balanced, and Science. We did see an increase in the number of students who took these assessments across all 3 assessments. We are still not at the level of participation that we were at prior to the pandemic, but we are seeing positive growth, and we are also still striving towards reaching that same level and surpassing the level of the Washington State participation rate for students. I'm going to speak directly about the performance indicators that you see here that are attached to our strategic plan and to Goal 1, supporting our students. The performance indicators we're going to look through tonight are focused on the percentage of students in grades K through 8 who are at or above grade level in reading as a goal, as a target measure that we're using. Students who are at or above grade level in math, K through 8, and then also the percentage of students in grade 10 who are at or above grade level in math. And I have the note here at the bottom, just important as well for the public. I know I mentioned the grade levels, but these assessments are not administered to students in K through 2, second grade. Here are the results that we have overall looking by grade level band, the percentage of students in grades K-8 who are at or above grade level in reading. You can see our scores here, 3rd through 8th grade. Here is math, percentage of students in grades K through 8 who are at or above grade level in math, and then again, 10th grade is also shown here. Here we're taking a look at trends over time. So you can see, first and foremost, I want to point out that there was no testing that took place in 2020 due to the pandemic, which is why you don't see a bar there. And in 2021, there's an asterisk because in 2021, we gave the spring assessment that was scheduled for the spring of 2020 in the fall of 2021. Additionally, when you look at this graph, the blue or gray bar represents all Edmonds students, and the black line is all Washington State students. So as you can see in the spring at SBA, for our English language arts, we performed slightly better than the Washington State average, but our performance levels still remain below pre-COVID levels. For math, here's the same trend data over time. And again, in the spring of 2023, our students performed slightly higher on the math SBA as compared to Washington State, the performance still remains below the levels of pre-COVID. This is looking at the WCAS, or the Washington Comprehensive Assessment for Science. And you can see again, we perform slightly better than the average across the state, and that the performance level is actually consistent with what it was at pre-COVID. The next couple of graphs are going to compare, looking at districts surrounding us, how we performed in relationship to Smarter Balanced on English Language Arts. My understanding is that the board has requested additional information looking at this data through the lens of free and reduced lunch, and that will be included this Friday in the board memo that you will receive. A few things that I'll note here in relationship to that. Currently 42% of our students in Edmonds qualify for free and reduced lunch. Everett, which is similar to us demographically, is at 37% of students at free and reduced lunch. The state average is 50% of students at free and reduced lunch, and you'll get, again, additional information in the Friday memo so you can look at it with all of that data included. This is looking at similar data focused around performance on the Smarter Balanced assessment in math. And then again, Washington Comprehensive Assessment for Science. And now we can take a look at data over time. First, we're going to focus in on English Language Arts, on the Smarter Balanced assessment, by race and ethnicity, and then by program data. I'm looking to see what our 2024 scores look like, to see if some of the positive trends that we're beginning to see continue moving forward. But as you can see, there are still gaps of concern that have persisted over time that we're continuing to focus in on and to address. There looks like there has been some improvement from 2021, for example, to 2023, particularly in supporting our multilingual learners. But again, we have more progress we'd like to make in that regard, and more gap closing that we need to see across our system. Looking at, again, comparable data, but now we're looking at math and performance on Smarter Balanced, again, by ethnicity over time and by program over time. I did fail to mention on the previous slide that the grayish blue bar represents our total district average, and then you can see that in comparison to these particular groups. And then looking at WCAS by race, ethnicity, and program again. So one of the questions that we often get asked is to consider students who did not test. As I know the board is aware, any student who does not complete the Smarter Balanced assessment is actually not counted as meeting standards, so is effectively scored a 0 when it comes to our scores overall. So when we look at our data, we want to consider how did our students do who tested versus when we look at the data of all students and factoring in those students that did not test, which brings down some of those scores overall. So when you look at our ELA results and you look at just our students who tested and completed the SBA and ELA, 57% of those students met standard, as opposed to 54% when you factor in those that did not complete the test. Overall, if you compared that to Washington State, so if in Washington State we only looked at the students who took the test, 52% met standard, as opposed to when you factor all, 51%.
Is that with students who started and didn't complete, or just students that chose not to take it?
Students who chose not to take it. Thank you for the clarification question.
There's a minimum number of items. So if a student goes in and answers 2 items or something, they might do that and it would still be counted as they didn't take it because they didn't complete the minimum number for it to be even scored. Just a technicality.
And then similarly, looking at math, if we consider students, only the students who tested 43% met standard versus when you factor in all at 42%, and you'll see the comparison to the state. Statewide, it's 39% who tested met standard, and when you factor in all, it actually stays pretty consistent, the number of students who met standard. One of the things that is important is, again, increasing participation rates on taking these exams, and that is a factor in WCAS, in this Washington Comprehensive Science Assessment, because at our district level, we have about 81% participation rate, is one of the pieces of data that I shared in an earlier graph. And when you consider that, there's a 19% of our kids are not taking this particular exam, so that's factoring into our overall scores. WCAS, however, is not counted as meeting a graduation pathway requirement. It is not eligible for that. So there's a bit of a tension there, but it is a test that when we see increased participation, we do tend to see those rates go up. And you can see that here. When we look at the students who completed WCAS, 53% met standard. So now, and for our study session on November 14th, there's a variety of things we're going to be taking a look at and some different considerations for next steps. One is looking at other metrics that we can use to monitor progress and to support students in being ready for these assessments, and really ready in the sense that they are meeting grade level standards in reading and math and science. iReady is a tool you heard about earlier this evening. It is one which is a very powerful and effective tool at predicting and at establishing a pattern or a growth trend for students to predict if they will meet standard, if they're making progress towards grade level standards. So we've been exploring that more this year and sharing that information with our principals and asking principals to look more deeply and teachers to look more deeply at the MyPath and instructional lessons that are available within iReady to help students meet these grade level standards. So we will continue to do that, and we'll look at that a little bit more deeply as well. We will continue to monitor and improve participation rates. Part of our increase in participation rates is really due this year to increasing participation rates at our high schools. We had previously provided SBA testing as a separate part of the school day, meaning students would come in early, there was an altered bell schedule, and then they would attend their 6-period classes. This last year in 2023, we embedded the Smarter Balance assessment within the school day, and that did lend to a higher participation rate. So we intend to continue to do that this school year and to continue to find ways to increase student participation. This data is provided to all of our schools. Our building principals are aware of how their students have performed on SBA math and ELA, and this is going to continue to be part of the collaborative work that they do with their principal supervisors to make meaning of that data, to seek and find ways to improve student achievement in those areas. And then, as I've mentioned, we're looking forward to that study session on November 14th and the opportunity to take a little bit of a deeper dive and have some conversation and make meaning of the data and our next steps. And with that said, any questions at this time?
Questions, comments?
Just looking forward to the deep dive.
So I really want to thank you. And I also want to say, while we use the phrase, do they meet grade level expectations, I think it's important for the public to know this is a standards-based assessment. If you look at the standards, they are very high level. There is what they call a depth of complexity, a depth of knowledge that is measured across these items. These are not regurgitation of facts, very few of the items. I encourage you, if you really want to see what our kids are being asked to process and understand, when they read things, the kind of problem solving for math, the kind of reasoning that's involved, the kind of science thinking, setting up a hypothesis, what would happen if this happened or that happened, much, much more high level than, for example, when I was in school, or even before any of these standards came into acceptance and use. So I think it's really important for people to understand this is not an easy test. And it's important for our teachers to continue to work toward making sure that what's going on in classrooms aligns with those standards. I also really appreciate how you talk about the relationship to other metrics. You guys gave us a really excellent report in our Friday report on attendance. And our attendance is just not as good as it needs to be. And we know if kids aren't in school, they're not learning, right? So I think it might be interesting, I don't know if it's possible, to look at the correlation between attendance and scores on our assessments as well, so that we can really show people that when attendance is lower, students are achieving at a lower rate than when kids are in school. I realize it's a correlation and not a cause effect. We don't know about the cause effect, but I think it's really important that our parents understand that attendance matters, and we need to really go back to the kinds of attendance expectations that we had before. It just struck me when I was looking at that report, and I really want to thank Allison for that report. It was a really, really helpful report. And I'm really looking forward to the study session where we go deeper.
I just have a question and a comment. A question about what percentage of our students are currently in the EL-ML program across the district? Do we know? Approximate?
I turn to Victor for that number.
Yeah, we have about, this week, identify about 3,800 students, active students.
That's incredible. That's a huge number of students for whom English is a second language or a third or a fourth, who are working to gain access to our curriculum. And I just wanted to sort of connect to our middle school presentation where we saw, a light there where they have found a way to really help the ML students. Once the ML students can improve their English language, they improve their access to all of our curriculum. And I think that those are the kinds of small success stories that I'm really kind of looking for and hope, and every year I personally gripe. Everybody gripes about our test scores, but I do see, not only tonight with College Place, but other places across the district where we're doing a much better job of helping our ML students gain access to our education. So I'm looking forward to further successes, and that will play out in our test scores. Thank you.
So I think it was interesting to know that the increased participation rate came from a change in the schedule structure, because in past years, these test administrations were given in the morning on a 3-hour late start basis, where those who will be taking the test do come to school in the morning, and those not will be coming 3 hours later, and then turns out the previous school year that was changed, in that there was no 3-hour late start, and that all students were to be at school testing or not, where the students testing will be testing and the students not testing would be in a advisory. And I think that change was unpopular among the student population, in that students did not want to come to school doing nothing for 2-3 hours. And I'm hoping that there's some way to keep them engaged while students who are testing are testing.
I would hope so too. And that would be, that's a surprise to me to hear that schedule, but we are working with each of our high schools to build their schedule for smarter balance testing, and I'll take that under advisement. I appreciate you giving me that heads up as we move forward for this year.
Yeah, you got to keep the students engaged or else they're not going to come to school. And if they're not coming to school, attendance.
I 100% agree. Thank you.
For the Smarter Balance assessments, how do you reach the students that might not be on campus regularly doing programs such as Running Start?
It's a 10th grade assessment, so typically students are not in Running Start in 10th grade, so that's not a factor, but if a student is absent, there are makeup opportunities and there's an extended window to take the assessments. But good question when you think about what do we do with students who might have chronic absenteeism or might miss for other reasons, and there is an extended makeup window.
Because I know there were still like assessments, those kinds of big assessments that I did take last year in 11th grade, and I'm expected to this year, but as a Running Start student, it's really hard for me to receive that information. How do you think we'd be able to combat that issue?
It's a great question, particularly with the WCAS, which is an 11th grade assessment, in making sure we have information going out to all of our Running Start students. So again, I think that's a great question I can take back to our building principals and to express to them that concern about just communication and staying looped in with our Running Start.
Yeah, and Carter, and with Running Start, the purpose of the SBA assessments are really just a test to see if a high school student is meeting high school level standards in English and math, and if a Running Start student is completing college level math and English, then that would fulfill as a graduation requirement, and the SBA requirement isn't that important for the individual student, but for the school district, it probably is, yeah.
So I was wondering, I know the test is something that you're automatically opted into, and to not take it, you have to opt out of it. Is that still correct?
That's correct.
So do you know why students are choosing not to take it, or is that info you don't have?
We don't have info down to the exact science of being able to express to you how many students said the reason was X versus Y. We know that one of the impacts with participation going down over time, and certainly since before the pandemic, is because there are multiple ways that a student can show and fulfill a graduation pathway. SBA is only one. So a student might be able to fulfill that graduation pathway requirement on an IB exam. They might be able to do it through an AP exams. And so there's more choices available for students, which definitely has an impact on participation because you don't necessarily feel like you have to take this to meet that requirement. That is one factor, something that's changed over time.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Lisa, thank you so much. One thing that it would be helpful for us to find out with regard to the public comment that was made about the student not knowing how they had done on it is how is communication going out to homes, to parents and to students? And it should not just be the report, but it should be, you know, with a cover letter that puts it into context. So we don't want anybody berating their child if they didn't do as well as they would think or anything like that, but to understand it's just one piece of information. On the other hand, it's important that they get timely results. So if we could find out sort of
Absolutely.
what that is.
I'll provide that in the Friday memo as well, just
That'd
to
be great.
confirm. With the transition to cumulative, I didn't want to just answer on the spot definitively what we
I
did
get
this
it.
fall, but we will know by Friday.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Okay, thank
It's
you.
a great work.